So before we get into the video, I just needed to put in a couple of disclaimers here. The first of which is that my kids were awake while I was recording this, and I am very sorry that you can hear them, but I couldn't cut that out. So just know that it is there, and we're just gonna go with it, because we're all moms. Or at least, I'm a mom, and that's just my life. The second, and way more important, is that I just needed to warn you that in this video I do talk about sexual abuse and sex, and so if these are things that you are sensitive about or you don't want to hear anybody talk about, that's fine. Just didn't want you to be shocked or surprised by the content in this video. The third thing I needed to say is that I am in no way a psychologist. I have learned and studied, but I am not here to diagnose anybody or give anybody any sort of cures or ways to get better or anything like that from an actual psychological standpoint, so please don't hold me accountable for that. I am simply talking about my experience and how that affected me and just opening it up to be able to have conversation if you feel like you would like to do that. I do come from a Christian perspective when I talk about sex. I have researched outside of my religion. I have researched within science and psychology to come to the beliefs that I have. So please, if you disagree with me, I am okay with that. I am okay with you expressing your disagreements in the comments, but if you wouldn't mind, please be kind and don't make assumptions about me and assume that the only reason that I believe what I believe about sex is because of my Christian background. I am not brainwashed. I have done a lot of research, and I am happy to talk to you about that research at some point if that is something that you would like to do. I also do my best to be as kind and considerate to others as possible, but please remember that this is also my channel and my opinions, and everybody's allowed to their opinions, just like you're allowed to put your opinions in the comments. I do my best to be respectful, and I hope that you'll do the same. Thank you, and I hope that you get something out of this video. So, I was sitting and trying to think about what I wanted to talk to you about today. And God brought something to mind that I kind of talked to him about for a minute, and I was like, are you sure? That's kind of heavy. Like, we're still pretty new to the channel. Are you sure you want me to talk about this? But there must be somebody out there who needs to hear it. And like, I'm fine talking about it, but I've never talked about this in such a big setting before where whoever wants to see it will see it. So that's a little like, but more so, it's a heavy topic. Like, it's a very heavy topic, and I'm not sure if you guys want to hear about it. I guess we'll see. Welcome to Talks with Jess. Even though today is a heavier day, I am happy that you're here. I really am. If you have a daughter, I think that this will be in particular important for you to hear. And if you have a son, also important, but I think daughters even more so. So, a little bit of history on me first before I get going. I am a missionary kid. My parents moved to, well, my parents and me and my brother moved to Mexico when I was 5 years old, and we were there for 10 years. Yes, I speak fluent Spanish, although it's not as good as it used to be because I have learned as I've grown up and become an adult that I am definitely fluent in kid Spanish. There's a lot of adult words that I don't know. And B, I haven't spoken it like every day for the past 12 years, so it's been a while. So it's not great. It's not as good, but I still have the Mexican accent and everything whenever I speak Spanish. So that's cool. It has served me very well. But my parents went there to be missionaries, and the first stint that they were there, or that we were all there, they were house parents. And there's this group, or this place right outside of Mexico City, and they have, well, at the time they had 4 homes, and they 3 of the homes were for children of pretty much any ages. We had a lot of big families there, and one of the homes, the one that my parents were house parents for, was for 18 and above. And these kids were like working their way out. So my parents would help them with finances and like the whole idea of getting a job and all of these things, transitioning into the world. Now, this is where things kind of get interesting, I guess. So shortly after we moved there, honestly, a lot of this is kind of blocked out. There's a lot of things that I don't remember well, but one of the guys there ended up molesting me. And it went on for a long time. By my guesstimation, it went on at least a year, if not more. I only have like 1 or 2 vivid memories of it actually happening, and even then it's like snapshots. And I really think that my brain just blocked it out because I just don't do super well with really bad negative things. And so anyway, my mom found out about it, and my parents did everything they could to protect me, but they felt that they had a duty and a responsibility to take care of these kids. And this, it's interesting. I've talked about this before, and like I'm past it and I'm good, but I'm super nervous for some reason. Like my heart's going. Anyway. So my mom and dad found out, and they did everything that they could to take care of me and to protect me. But there were some, they did their best. They did. And I know my mom's probably going to watch this. And so I want to be sensitive because I know that this was a hard thing for them too. I mean, now that I'm a mom, I can only imagine what it was like to find out that this has happened to your daughter. But, so, wow, I have not been this tongue-tied in a long time, on doing something like this. I want to talk about some of the things that the ways that my parents handled it that were good, and the ways that they handled it that I don't think ended up helping me, and then following on how it affected me. So when my mom first found out, I got in trouble. At least that's how I remember it. I got in trouble, and my mom was upset. And I know now that she wasn't upset with me, but it seemed like she was upset with me. I mean, I was 6. So, I had all these new rules and things that I wasn't allowed to do, and places I wasn't allowed to go. I was no longer allowed to wear shorts. I was no longer allowed, like, not regular shorts. They had to be like at my knee, and I was no longer allowed to wear some of my dresses that I loved because they were too short. And those kind of rules went on throughout as I grew up. And I understand the thought process behind that for sure. But what I know of pedophilia now, I don't think that made a ton of difference, because somebody who's a pedophile who's going to do what they can to like entice a little girl to be alone with him, he didn't care about how I was dressed. He saw me, and I was this little white girl, and in Mexico, little white girls there's something fanciful, there's something fantastical. People oftentimes didn't want to talk to me because they just assumed things about me because of my skin, and like light skin is very desirable in Mexico and stuff. So I mean, I don't think that made much of a difference, and it really just made me feel like I was in the wrong. Like I had done something wrong. It made me feel like it was my fault. And Mom, I'm sorry if you're watching this. I'm not trying to hurt your feelings. I'm really not. I'm just trying to help other moms if they experience this and have to deal with this. I'm just, from my own experience, trying to help them to deal with it in the best way that they can. And it's an impossible situation, right? Like, how do you accurately deal with that? I really don't know. But I am telling you what didn't work the way it should have. So there's that. I also wasn't allowed to leave our apartment space to go to the other spaces without my parents. I wasn't allowed to be here and be there, and etc. So there were a lot of rules put on me. And even after we left the orphanage, I think my parents were pretty afraid, particularly my mom, that this would happen again, because statistically speaking, somebody who is molested or sexually assaulted in any way, shape, or form, victimized in that way, it's almost like they have this target that no one else sees except for predators. And a good portion of people who are victimized once will be victimized again. And my mom knew this from experience. She went through other things, and it's her story to tell, but even worse than mine. And that's how she was aware of it and vigilant. And I think knowing the repercussions of being assaulted or being victimized in this way, my mom understood how much it could hurt. And even still, as cautious as she was, it still happened. And I'm not trying to scare you, but it's a thing, man. It is a thing. And it is scary. And in a way, I think we should be scared. Like, we should be vigilant. We should pay attention. And because if you are paying attention and it can happen, how much more so could it happen if you're not paying attention, right? So how did this guy get this to happen? As far as I remember, there was touching and some kissing, and I won't go into too much details, not kissing on my mouth. But the way he got me to trust him, he would often give me, in Mexico, going to the store on the corner street is a huge thing. I mean, everybody does it. There are stores everywhere, they call them tiendas. And kids like to take their money and go and buy chips and candy and all kinds of different things. So they're just these little, kind of like convenience stores, I guess. And he would give me a little bit of money here and there to go get myself some candy. He would often get me candy and stuff. And that sounds so cliche, but it worked. I mean, I thought he was my friend. And so he was this older person and he was my friend. And so then whenever he asked me to do things and to go places with him and whatever, like, it felt wrong. It felt icky to me, but in my view, he was a man who had authority, and he had gained I trusted him. And so when you trust somebody and they ask you to do something, if you're a kid and you're taught to obey, and when you trust somebody, you think that they have your best interest at heart, you do it, right? And so even though it felt wrong, I hadn't been taught about any of that, and so I didn't know any better. And that's why I think it was so shocking whenever my mom was so upset, because I felt like I had done something wrong and I had no idea. It felt like I was being punished for something that I didn't even know was wrong. And so I stuffed it down, and it didn't mean anything to me until I hit puberty. And I hit puberty full force at 13 years old. And that's when I learned what sex was and all of that. And I spiraled pretty hard. I became very depressed. I mean, I remember those days in flashes. I don't remember very many things very acutely. I have an excellent memory for details in the past and things that happened to me and stuff like that. Like, I have an excellent memory, but those days, it went on for years, are fairly dark. There are flashes, there are things here and there. I remember some stuff, but there's a lot that I don't remember. I blocked a lot of it out. But I think it's because through my depression, I wasn't experiencing the world, at all. And I remember feeling that. That was the biggest thing. Was it felt like there was like a misty veil between me and my person, like my actual person who was my body was going through the motions and doing all these things, and I knew that I was angry because of the way I was reacting and the fact that I was raising my voice, but I didn't feel it. And I knew that I was sad because I was crying, but I didn't feel it. I felt literally nothing. And I didn't know that that was connected to what had happened to me until years and years later. But the other thing that happened is once I learned what sex was, it was completely by chance through an episode of Law and Order SVU. This lady was on the stand and she talked about it explicitly. You know, he did this to me forcefully, and she said, did this and this, and I was like, that's what sex is? Because, like, obviously you know about sex and that it involves naked people, but I was never allowed to watch any sort of anything in TV shows and movies and stuff. Like, anytime it came up, we were to avert our eyes, which is fine. Like, I do not fault my mom for that at all. I probably will do the same. But I found out what it was, and in our home, talking about sex was not a thing. And I think, to my mom's credit, I think she was just so scared of me becoming hypersexual, that it just was something that we didn't talk about, because if you don't talk about it, then you don't put those thoughts into your kids' minds, and then hopefully they won't become too curious, right? I totally get that thought process. But it didn't work out for me so well, because once I found out what it was, I'm a very curious person, and that led to a lot of different things. My brother actually introduced me to pornography unintentionally. He was 8, and he looked up boobies on Google, and he was like, Jess, come here. I looked up boobies, and there's some sick looking boobies on here. And it wasn't pictures of boobs, it was pictures of other things. And that, like, was around the same time that I had just learned what sex was. And so I spiraled, and I ended up becoming addicted to pornography. I hated the stuff. I thought it was gross and weird, and just, I didn't like it. But I got addicted to it anyway. And actually, before I got married, and that one went on for a long time. And all of this connects, and I'll tell you how in just a second. So I started with images, and for me, it stayed on images for a very long time. And I've always been somebody who intrinsically, like, internally has a deep desire to please God and do as I am told. I'm obedient at heart, and letting people down breaks my own heart probably more than it breaks the person's heart that I let down. So it was so hard for me, and that's why I say it's an addiction, because an addiction, by definition, at least from what I've heard before, is, you know, it's an addiction when you know that it's hurting you, you know it's not okay, and you don't want to do it, but you do it anyway, and you just can't. It's almost like you can't help yourself, and that's where I was. And it got deeper and deeper and deeper, and then it's actually after I got married that I discovered that pornography came in video form too. I didn't know. And I didn't have sex until I got married. I was very firm on that. So this is where I'm kind of, I deviate, I think, from a lot of people, and I think it's because of my people-pleasing aspect and the way I was brought up. It's almost like I split into the two camps. People who are victimized in this way, especially at a young age, typically go one of two directions. They either become hypersexual, where around their teenage years, they get extremely curious, they get into pornography, addicted to pornography. A lot of them end up, particularly girls, dressing very risque, getting as much attention as they can from other boys, and eventually end up having sex. And they become hypersexual. And then the other camp typically completely shuts down sexually. They don't want anything to do with it. They aren't really attracted to boys or guys or whatever, and they just don't want anything to do with it. And I was oddly in both camps. Like, I was in some ways in this camp, in some ways in the other. So on this side, I was extremely curious, and I feel like that I was hypersexual in that way. Like, sexuality was so interesting to me, And that could just be because it was kind of taboo in our home, but it could relate to this as well. And then on the other side, I had my first boyfriend when I was 16, and I honestly had no real desire to even kiss. Like, my first boyfriend only boyfriend is now my husband. And he was a typical teenage boy and wanted to do all the things, but I was like, no, and I'm totally fine not doing any of it, and I'm totally fine not even having sex. That being said, we were together for 5 years, so things did happen. So first, disclaimer, my husband is a very different human being than he was when he was 16 years old, as I think most 16 and then a 16-year-olds into adulthood are. I would hope that he would be a different person, 11 years later. But when we were first together and we were young, he came from a home that he wanted love so bad. And as a young boy, he thought he completely equated sexuality with love. And so he pushed for it. And now he never forced me. Like, he is a great man, and he never forced me on anything, but he did push me a lot of times past where I wanted to go or where I was comfortable going. And then I became comfortable with it because once you just become comfortable with it. But I got to where, like, once I experienced some things, that flamed everything. And I think I knew that was going to happen because I know myself, and I knew from the things that my mom had told me and the warnings that she had given me about what could happen because of that what happened in my past. I knew that this could be a thing, and I wasn't interested. I didn't want to be hypersexual. I didn't want anything to do with sex until I got married because I did not want to disappoint God that way, and I didn't want to, I believe so firmly in in sex within the confines of marriage. I think that's the way God designed it to be, which means that it has to be the best way. And there are so many ways in which having sex outside of marriage psychologically changes things and changes the dynamics of your marriage once you do get married, and the dynamics of sex inside of marriage. I didn't want any of that. I didn't want to bring baggage in. I didn't want to have sex. But once we did some things and I experienced some stuff, that sparked it. Now, we still didn't end up having sex. And I only ever went as far as he pushed me. I never pushed for us to go any further. But once those lines were crossed, there was absolutely no going back because I, again, became addicted. And that's another thing that's very, very common. Hypersexuality, high sex drive, addiction to sex in a very unhealthy way. I didn't get to that point, but those are all very common things that can come from being victimized, particularly at a young age. Distorted view of sexuality is also huge. When you're introduced to sexuality at such a young age where your mind and your emotions can't process it, that's going to distort things, right? That's why I think it's so hard and it's so scary to be raising our children in a world like today where it terrifies me, guys. I'm raising a daughter and 2 sons, and there are a whole host of things that come with that. And the whole concept of trying to teach them about sexuality and the thought that even still they could be victimized or they could end up using it wrong and ruining a lot of the beautiful, amazing things that they could have in the future, that breaks my heart. I know, and I'm not saying that if you have sex outside of marriage, everything is ruined for you forever. No, but I do think that things are changed permanently for you. And that's, I've talked to people. I've done my research, I've talked to people, and I'm not just saying this. I'm not just saying this because of my Christian background. I'm saying this because I think there's definite psychological proof that, and anecdotal proof that having sex outside of marriage and being sexual outside of the confines of a committed long-term marriage relationship. I know marriage doesn't mean that all the time in our society anymore. And even being exposed to sexuality and stuff and desensitized to it, it changes things. And God created sexuality to be this sacred, beautiful, amazing thing to be shared between a husband and a wife. And anything outside of that it's a pale comparison to the beautiful thing that it can be. And I think that our world desensitizes us to what sex can be. And the fact that there are so many people who do what was done to me, it causes all kinds of issues. And guys, I could sit and talk about this for a long time, and I probably will make more videos about this topic, because not necessarily being victimized, but the topic of sex itself and teaching your children about sex in a healthy way, because I think it's so important, because I did come from a home where my mom did try, but I think that there are things that could have been improved upon. And I'm sorry if you hear my children, they're fighting in their bedroom because they decided not to take a nap today, and it's whatever. Anyway, so if you hear kids in the background, that's what's going on. But anyway, I think sex is so important, and I think that we are sexual human beings. There's this book that I read a long time ago, and I'd like to reread it. It's called Sex God by Rob Bell. Now, Rob Bell is not somebody that I endorse now, but before he changed some of his philosophies and thinkings, he had some amazing insight into God and Christianity. And this book in particular, he talks about how God created sex, and he created us to be sexual beings. And he talks about all the different ways in which this presents itself in our lives, not just within sex in the marriage bed, but in every way of our life. We are sexual beings, and what that means and what that entails. And because of that, I agree with him. Because of the fact that we are sexual beings, I think that it's definitely something that we need to take seriously on teaching our children and being very active about how we present this. I have read pieces of, not fully, but I do plan to, a book called, I believe it's called Not Just the Talk, but I'll show a picture of it right here. And it is amazing. I recommend it to every parent. It talks this guy, he's a youth minister, and he talks about how to make conversations about sex an everyday, perfectly fine occurrence in your home, because you want your kids to come to you. You don't want them going to their friends who know nothing. You don't want them going to the internet. You want them to come to you, you who have a godly perspective on sex and what it is and what it means and how beautiful it can be. And he talks about how to talk to your children about sex and sexuality at every stage of childhood and teenage life in an age appropriate way. Like, I'm not going to sit my 3-year-old down and say, explain to her the dynamics of sex. No, because that's ridiculous and that's not age appropriate. She doesn't need to know that right now. But, if she's 5 or 6 years old and she asks me about certain things, like, I want her to ask me. I don't want to freak out. I don't want to, I want to be prepared, but I want her to ask me about sex. And hopefully, if you can create, my hope and dream is if I can create an environment where my daughter and my sons can come and talk to me and my husband about sex, then they won't deal with some of the things that I dealt with. They will have a healthy, wonderful view of sex, and they will on their own realize and decide that it's important to wait. And they'll have a conviction, because if your kid doesn't have a conviction to wait, but you want them to wait, they're not going to wait. It needs to come from inside. It needs to come from inside of them. And in order for them to make that decision, they need to be informed. They need to understand what they're even deciding. My mom did do that for me. And that is, I'm taking pages from her playbook on that one, because she did an excellent job with me, teaching me about sexuality in that way, and why it's so important to wait, and all the things that can happen if you don't wait, and all of that. But also, if you're teaching your kids about sexuality and how important it is and about their bodies, then hopefully they won't make the same mistake I made. They won't say, okay, yeah, sure, I'll take my pants off for you, you know, just because somebody that they trusted asked them to. They'll know better. They'll know to say, no, absolutely not. This is my body, and you cannot touch it because you don't mean me well. And I don't want to scare you, but this is one of the biggest issues in our world today. 1 out of every 4 women, those are the statistics, 1 out of every 4 women is sexually assaulted, sexually victimized, abused, molested, what have you. 1 out of 4 women. That is a lot. I have a feeling that the statistics are probably a little bit higher because I bet you 10 to 1 there are a lot of people that go unreported. So, with that being said, if this has happened to you and you're still in that dark place, please don't hesitate to talk to me. You can find my email on my page and you can reach out to me. I'm not a doctor, I'm not a psychologist, but I am somebody who's been through it, and I can hear you. I can listen and maybe give you some pointers if that's what you want. If this, heaven forbid, has happened to your child, just know you're not alone. If it's happened to you, if it's happened to your kid, you are not alone. 1 out of 4 women. That's a horrible statistic, but on the same token, that means that we're not the only ones. And if you've never talked about it, if it's happened to you and you've never talked about it, please do, because it can be scary. It can be really scary, but I still remember the day that I talked about it. I wasn't planning on it. It just happened. But I talked about it for the first time to someone other than my mom, and even with my mom, I wouldn't talk about it. She would talk to me about it. I wouldn't talk to her. And I talked about it with this girl to help her not feel alone, because she was telling me about some of the things that she was going through in that moment. And it ended up helping me to realize that this wasn't some deep, dark secret that I needed to keep hidden forever. This wasn't a burden that I needed to just keep carrying. This wasn't some filth that I needed to just have forever. I could let it go and be free. And that was the beginning of my journey to freedom. That was my beginning to being better, to becoming better. And if this has happened to your kid, or it does happen to your kid, I just do want to give you a little bit of encouragement. I've gone through it, and I'm okay. My relationship with God is really the main reason why I sit here and can talk to you about this and feel whole and happy today. He's the reason why I have a normal, beautiful marriage, why I didn't end up spiraling into a horribly terrible place where I just went off the deep end when it comes to sex. And so if this has happened to your kid or to you, and you're still struggling with it, cling to Jesus. Cling to Him. Learn. Be free. And honestly, that's the best place to start. And He'll guide you from there. He'll tell you where to go from there. But like I said, if you need somebody to talk to, you don't have to put it in the comments. I wouldn't want to express myself in the comments whenever I first started down the journey to recovery either. So don't feel pressured to do that if you don't want to. But seriously, shoot me an email. Heck, send me your phone number and I'll give you a call. And you can pour your heart out and know that you're talking to somebody who has been through it, somebody who will absolutely not judge you. And sometimes it can help to just talk to somebody you don't even know that well. Like, It really can. So yeah, I hope this helped somebody. I don't know if it did. I know it was really heavy. I know that it's a little different than some of the things that I've been putting up so far, but I think it's so important. I think talking to your kids about sex, I think talking about sexuality and the fact that molestation and sexual abuse are so prevalent in this world. I think knowing that and just keeping that at the forefront of your mind, not to where you are anxious and just weighed down by it, but to where you just know, to where you're just aware of it, so that you can be vigilant and so that you can hopefully protect your kids and help them to protect themselves. Thank you for joining me. I do appreciate it. And if you're here all the way till the end, thank you for sticking around. If you like my videos and you are like me, trying to live mom life like a godly woman, please consider subscribing. That'll give you notifications whenever I post. If not, you can just come back Tuesdays and Saturdays. That's whenever I upload new videos. And I do so appreciate you sitting and listening to me talk. My Instagram is right here if you want to follow me. I don't post on there super frequently, but I do upload things just about general life stuff, you know, a day in the life of me. So if you're interested in you, or you just want to be friends, you can go ahead and follow me, shoot me a message or something, and tell me a little bit about yourself and about your life. I look forward to hearing from you. And if not, if you want to be one of the silent viewers, that's fine too. I look forward to talking to you again Tuesdays and Saturdays. See you then. Bye.